I'll call the meeting to order. This is a policy committee meeting of the West Bend School Board. And just for the good of the order here, we've got our policy committee members here tonight from the board, Paul Fisher, Chris Swigert, and I'm Joel Ongert. And Superintendent Kierkegaard is with us here as well. And we've got three policies on the agenda tonight. Policy 171.1, public notice of board meetings. 521 is social networking technology, and 522.7 staff use of information. And so we'll start with the revised board policy 171.1, and Assistant Superintendent Laura Jackson will get us kicked off tonight.
All right, 171.1, we wanted to come back and revisit this. It was revised, earlier this year earlier this school year in September. But the reason we wanted to come back and revisit it is about the posting of notices. What's required in statute is that we post it at 3 public locations or 1 public location and our district website. We, in our policy, have that we will post it at all of our schools. At times, that can be a challenge. So there are unexpected things that come up, and our concern is that if there were to be a snowstorm and we didn't get it posted at every site, or there's an unexpected thing that happens and it's not posted at every site, we don't want to have that prevent us from hosting the meeting. So we would like to recommend that we change that to whenever possible. In the policy under 2C, we currently states to the public, by means of posting at the doors of the Education Service Center and each school of the district. We would say, and whenever possible, each school of the district. Are there,
What is the statute again?
the statute, I can read it to you exactly.
1984, and I handed you a copy of that.
And so when you look down under 1, and then there's sub-bullet A, sub-bullet 1, posting of a notice in at least 3 public places likely to give notice to the persons affected.
And public places is not necessarily brick and mortar, but public venues, so the newspaper,
Correct.
et cetera.
What it needs to be at placing the notice electronically on the governmental body's internet site would allow it to only be posted at 1 public venue.
And so I had asked Laura to bring this forward, and not because of the hardship to put the, that's not a big deal. We certainly can go to all the spots, but sometimes it just doesn't get done, okay? And so even today, I think Ms. Wemmer and a couple of the cabinet members were doing some site visits, and we noticed that it wasn't at one of the elementary schools, or it was and it came back, it was taken down, and so we put it back up again. And sometimes somebody might think, Don, you're going to do McLean, and Don is only going to stop at Fair Park, and you get one that isn't posted. Typically, we send it out to the administrative assistants. They post it. There's no guarantee that it stays posted, because somebody, if it's at the high school, somebody might rip it off the door before we even leave the building. And, if we had an AR, and we don't, if we had an AR for this issue, I would suggest that we keep the AR the same, and whenever possible, I don't think it's critical that, I'd like to post it at every building, okay? But I also don't want to get in trouble because we inadvertently left it off of the Rolfs building, because nobody's at the Rolfs building for the summer, and by our policy, it says we should post it at the Rolfs building, because that's one of our schools, okay? I think we'd still post it at the Rolfs, but if it was inadvertently left off, we're not out of compliance of our own policy because we inadvertently left off the Rolfs.
So just a question from the administration's point of view. What is the most common way that people find out about the meetings? I'd imagine the website?
I imagine website, yes. the public library is a common place where people might peruse the agenda.
The problem with the public library is that we posted at the public library, and so it's been closed since March,
Yeah.
okay? And in the library, they posted, I believe Tim said, inside. It's not, in our case, we posted so that it's viewable from the outside, but if it's posted inside, and first of all, I don't know if anybody was there, and then second of all, even if they were there and they posted it inside, you couldn't get in the library anyway, okay? So I would assume that our website is the most common place for the agenda, that, and we still, Jen sends it out to the press in advance because it's a public meeting and we post the public meetings with the agenda that way.
I'm in agreement that we certainly want to comply with the statute. We need to start there. But the more and more additional places we add to this, it's just one more opportunity for an inadvertent compliance misstep. I'm in favor of the amendment. I was perhaps thinking of a different approach, slightly different approach, and that is in 2C, we keep to the public by means of posting at the doors of the Education Service Center, and we stop there. Because I wonder if we would get into an argument around, well, was it possible to put it at the schools or not? I understand the flavor, but I think, a supplemental administrative rule saying that, we will endeavor, but it's not a compliance mishap not to have it posted at all the other buildings. I'm curious what the other committee members think, but I'd simplify 2C and just say to the public by means of posting at the doors of the Education Service Center. And if we want to adopt an additional helpful practice of posting it at additional locations, well, that's fine, certainly. But I don't know that we necessarily want to bind ourselves to it by a policy. My thought.
I agree that, policy should be the absolutes, and we can always go above and beyond. And just want to make sure that for anybody watching out there, that you understand that this is not some, malicious intent to be able to, call a meeting on the spur of the moment. We will continue to follow all of the standard posting guidelines that we've always done. This is just to deal with those edge conditions where we may not have people in the building, or I like the protection from the standpoint of if a student were to come by and just rip it off the wall and by mistake it isn't posted, and no fault of administration. So I agree with Chris that we simplify it down to just the ESC, the building here that we can control very easily, done and done.
While we're at it, just 2B that lists West Bend Daily News, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, WBKV should be changed to WIBD. They changed their call signals, their call letters a handful of years ago, so if we're updating it, WIBD. And then I agree, when you say whenever possible and it's not there, then somebody says, well, why wasn't it possible? Well, because Don didn't have enough gas in his car to get down to Jackson. So I think stopping there and saying, posting it on the front doors of this building, the West Bend Library, if that's possible. But the district website, I think that's where, if you want to come to a board meeting, that's where you're going to go to see if there's a board meeting happening tonight and what's on the agenda and things. So would anybody want to consider social media? Would we consider listing something like our district Facebook page or Twitter account or anything like that?
I think that's a great suggestion. I don't know that, again, we need to write it into the policy. I think that becomes part of Jen's standard, posting and so forth, that yeah, it gets out there through Nancy or whomever.
Anything else in the policy that, I know there's no changes here, but since we're taking a look at this, now would be the time.
I had nothing else.
Are we okay moving this one forward? And in 2C, it sounds like we're in agreement to stop where it says the Education Service Center.
I agree.
Agreed.
Okay? Good.
Make that change and then bring that forward. So Tim is coming up for the next policies.
521, social networking technology. This is Tim Harder, our Director of IT and Technology.
Good evening, board members. Mr. Unger, which one did you have first? Sorry.
We have
two.
521.
521, all right. So 521 is a policy that was really about social networking policy. And it was really developed in the day and age when social media, as you just talked about, is a way to get information out there and share. The policy that you have forth in front of you is actually very similar to the policy from WASB and recommended by them. We've also worked with our district lawyer team here to review a little bit of language in there. And what we've done in this policy has changed to go from just the use of social media by staff to also online systems. Over the past years, you've heard me talk about things around data privacy and cybersecurity. What this policy does is take a quite lengthy policy, shorten it, and what will come with this after a passage of the policy by the board would be a written AR. So in the current policy, it discusses you must contact somebody in Mr. Hansen's department if you want to run a Facebook page. Well, that's not the practice we're going to be going with in the future and so forth, so we would have an accompanying AR that goes with it. It really talks about the use of online platforms for instruction and for communication. References the fact that, you know, as we communicate back and forth through online systems, that it must be professional and courteous, that you are to the expectation that you are on work, and just because you may be away from work, you may still be using district-related computers, systems, and so forth, and representations of the district. And so that's really the change in 521. A lot of those step-by-step procedural pieces would actually move to the administrative rule at that point in time. Questions on 521?
So just to be clear, we've got kind of two 521s in front of me. I just want to be sure I'm looking at this. So there's the one with the red text.
Yes. So
And
you have the proposed policy and the current policy.
That's it, okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to be sure I had those in the right order. Thank you.
Yes, so yes, anything that is red has the changes in it. The all black ones are the current
The
policies that are
existing.
listed.
Thank you. Just wanted to double check.
Does our employee handbook talk about staff's use of technology when off duty?
It does. Part of the reason we're bringing this forward is to expand that administrative rule to make it clear for our staff, both in the systems that they use, what the expectations are, and thus the conversation with our attorney team here for the district of making sure we're not crossing a certain line in free speech and so forth, but yet that if I'm at home and I'm using a district system or I'm representing the district on one of our approved systems, I'm still working in essence. And that's really that larger paragraph at the bottom of page 1, Mr. Unger. It starts to address that idea of working
Right.
at home versus, or being off hours and being on duty. Yeah, it's all yours, man.
To Joel's question, you know, as Tim and I often are looking at the existing policy and then using it, you know, in practice, the language that you see in this new policy is often what we are then talking to the staff member about, but unfortunately that's often after the fact when maybe there's been, you know, a crossing of that line, especially when you look at the language in, not sure if it's this document or the next one, about the nexus between personal life and professional life. So we feel that this policy, that these changes between this policy and the next one really give more upfront information to the employee to help them better understand where that line is, because there's freedom of speech for the employee to use, you know, their social media for their own personal needs and those sorts of things. But at the same time, when it impacts your work or you represent yourself as an employee, now you're crossing over into a different line, which can potentially impact employment.
Thank you. So, you have two different policies here now, 521 and 522.7. Should those be combined into one policy?
I think in the future they will eventually. Currently, WASB has them separated as two, or they can be combined. I think right now, 522.7 is the overarching acceptable use for staff. We just did the student one not too long ago. I think having two separate policies and driving deeper into just the online systems of things and the social networking or the social media piece brings that focal point to where we need. When I think of the employee handbook that Lenny's team puts together here, we're going to call out some very specific information about each so that it's front and forward of what our expectations are moving forward. As we do some of those data privacy and cybersecurity things, and we saw that during COVID, thanks, Mr. Fisher, for giving this system, but we aren't going to use them for these reasons right here. There's language right in here that talks about what happens to Mr. Fisher if he chooses to use that system moving forward at that point in time. So I think keeping them separate for now, I think, over years, they will start to combine.
Well, we've already kind of jumped into 522.7, so if you haven't opened that one yet, why don't you open it, and we'll kind of wrap this up looking at both of them, I guess.
I'll give you a little background on 522.7. Currently, 522.7 is a 2.5-page policy, 2-page policy. The goal of this is to take really the entire WASB policy, add a little bit of verbiage that we currently have in our policy here about our policies and procedures around data privacy and cybersecurity. I've been in this role 6.5 years almost. When I came over to this role from the high school teaching realm, you didn't talk much about this. People who talked about cybersecurity and data privacy were the people who sit in my office next door to me. We talk about it, but nobody else did. And so this is that overarching piece of these are all of our systems. These are our expectations, that you have, unfortunately, you have no right to privacy when you're on our system here using our stuff. Everything's open records requestable. And so this is that overarching policy that drives every communication resource, every technology system and hardware that we would have in the district. So this is really verbatim from WASB.
This would also apply to a part-time athletic coach as well, right?
Any employee of the district. So if they are
Employee
an
who's getting
hourly,
paid,
a
yep.
short-term contract, as soon as you are paid by us, you would fall under this. Even so far, and I'm going to look at Mr. Hanson here, if we'd have a volunteer coach potentially in our new process, they still abide by our policies here. And so this would cover anybody at that point in time. 522.7 is also gone over as a specific policy when you onboard with us in the district. So teachers onboard with me, along with administration and certain staff groups. Other staff groups may meet with Mr. Hanson's department, but they are given a copy of this. We would actually give them a copy of both and call that out going forward.
Yeah, and I bring up like part-time volunteer coaches who may not work in our district during the day, but they're here to coach baseball or softball, and they're on the road with our students, and they're taking pictures and posting things on social media. And, the students certainly have rights to privacy and things, and the coach needs to know, the boundaries and limits, I guess, to what can and cannot be posted and said and commented on, so.
Yep, and our athletic directors have done a good job of starting to bring that to our focal point, but it is, we have families who don't want their, Mr. Hanson and I were just talking about this today, don't want a kid's name released or
Right.
their photo released. They have a form that they fill out. Doesn't matter if it's me as the director of technology or the volunteer coach or the principal, whomever, they don't have the right to give that information out. And we have a process for that and a way to check that, so yeah.
Good.
The pre-existing policy talked about personally owned technology and software, and I just was wondering if, I didn't see it in the new policy, not that it necessarily needs to be there, but maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and it's possible, I suppose, that there's technology now that prevents people from installing it, or
Yep,
can you talk
so-
about that a little bit?
So we don't allow any installation here locally unless you are an admin on the system. So there are very few of us who have that access. When you talk about personally owned technology, we aren't a BYOD district anymore. Does not stop you from bringing your personal device in as employee and connecting it, but it also talks about all of our data processes and review and monitor, audit, access, and disclose all message or confirmed receiver sent over. So anything sent over our network can still be monitored here. So even if you bring in your personal laptop here, you connect it to our Wi-Fi, just like when you go to the hotel, somebody can look at where you were going. Doesn't mean I can necessarily read your private email, I can't do that, But I can go and find out that, Mr. Zweigert, he went to JS Online today from his personal laptop, and we could trace that back. We do that monitoring just like every other entity when you access their public Wi-Fi.
And we still have 37 minutes before our next meeting, so let's just keep firing questions.
Questions, I mean, that's right. What else would you like to ask about? I mean, I don't think I've asked, usually, policies usually, like, okay, yep.
Well, can you describe, what are the most common areas where you're having discussions with employees about brushes up against the edge of violations, let's say?
Violation, most often it's the understanding of what I can and cannot talk about. So I give a spiel when we onboard our teachers here that just because I'm having a conversation with you, I may never list a kid's name, I may never list their address or anything else, but how I talk to the kid about that child and how I describe that family or whatever else may allow you or Mr. Ongard or Mr. Fisher or anybody to figure out who that is. And I think the most common conversations we're having is that teaching moment. That idea that, you don't have the right to give away information. What people's belief of information is, we're so used to clicking and I agreeing in today's online world that it's really those teaching moments. And after the fact, it's like, those conversations usually are, were you aware of this? And coming back to that, you can't release that. We don't have a lot of those conversations, which is good. It's not a common weekly or monthly thing that we have here. I think the more larger conversation really ties in with 521, and that's you can use this system because, or you can not use this system because of this. And just because Slinger or Kewaskum or Grafton uses it doesn't mean it meets our security standards here. And so that's probably the larger conversation that's happening right now. And then a lot of it's just, can I or can I not post a student's picture? And so we house a list of that at every single school site, those forms, so that if, the Daily News comes in here and wants to take pictures of a class, we know in that room who cannot be released at that point in time. And they check with the office before they leave.
So going back to Joel's example of an athletic coach, team just won, a big tournament, and we want to take a picture of the team. At what point is the coach in that scenario notified that there may be somebody on the team that is, has an order that they can't be, publicized and so forth? Is there a vetting process at the beginning of the season?
There is. Typically, the nice part with that, Mr. Fisher, is we typically have very few kids at the high school. So in my 6.5 years, I dealt with one student who did not release that information, and those athletic coaches, the staff were made aware. The number of families that we have that don't release that typically are involved in athletics. We don't have very many of those, so those coaches are. It's always a reminder email. We do a back to school with a variety of different things that our principals cover and our coaches cover in their onboarding. When they have their meetings, they talk about these things. We keep putting them at the focal point of, don't release their photo, don't put kids' information in an online system that isn't approved. It's a constant process of keeping and reminding them, so.
Tim, with those photos, do they opt out,
Yes.
not opt in?
Yes, it's part of state law and data directory, and so they have a variety of things they can opt out. It is a separate form that we release at the beginning of the year. They have till the end of September to file that with the district, and then it actually holds till the following September. So if I had not if I had chosen not to release my child's name publicly, it would actually hold till the end of September in 2020, the next year. And so, yeah, I want to say, and I didn't count lately, but I'd say we probably only have 15 or 20 families that have filled out that form across the entire district, K through 12. 4K is a little different because of working with both our rules and our form here, along with the private providers that we partner with.
Good questions. Any more? 34 minutes. You got 34 minutes.
34. I'm looking at the clock right now. I need 5 minutes to switch over to the next meeting if you give me that much time.
Yeah. I'd be comfortable with these changes.
Okay,
Agreed.
good. We'll move all three of these to our first reading at our next board meeting, and that's it for our agenda tonight. I don't know when our next policy meeting is. Do we have one scheduled? If not, it'll be, yeah. If not, we'll certainly reach out with a doodle or a whatever schedule to get something scheduled in the future. So if there's no more comments, questions, we'll adjourn. All right, very good. We're adjourned.